CAA number 3, this is our historical timeline. I'm Bailey Ferro.
I'm Lilly Mullins.
I'm Anabelle.
And I'm Faith Farmer.
So our first case we had is the Brown versus Board of Education. This is an ELL and special education case, and it was in 1954. Some key points about this case are that it was outlawed, segregated schools as inconsistent with equal education. This case forbids discrimination on the basis of national origin, and a memorandum. State schools with a 5% national origin minority group will abide by these new requirements as teachers with an ELL student or with special education. So implications for this case are that there is new special language instruction that can no longer be ignored or pushed aside for not understanding, and administrators had to communicate with parents in a language they understood. And then the limitation for this case is that there was no stampede to comply to the federal directive. Most schools continued to offer a little more than sink or swim. Many of these students are falling behind and dropping out.
So then there's the Bilingual Education Act. Some of the key points is it assists students with limited English skills. It has authorized resources to support education programs. It develops and disseminates instructional materials. And then some of its implications are it trains educators and aides, and it does not require schools to use language other than English to receive funding. Some of the limitations are it left questions if the act was going to speed up the transition to English or promote bilingualism.
This is the Section 504 of the Vocational Rehabilitation Act. This is a special education, and it was in 1973. The key points are that civil rights laws that prevents discrimination against all persons with disabilities in programs that receive federal funds. It gives them equal opportunities for students to participate in full range of school activities, and school district facilities must be accessible to those with accommodations to allow them to get equal participation. Some of the implications are that some students who are not eligible for special education services may receive accommodations in order for them to be successful in academic settings. Some of the limitations are that an individual may not be subject to changes in the terms and conditions of his or her employment, and usually they are only seen or tested if a parent or teacher makes a concern.
The Lau versus Nicholas case was in 1974, and some key points of this case are that the major court decision is that it was the major court decision on the rights of language minority. There was a lawsuit for 1,700 Chinese students who were being denied of education on equal terms and failed comprehension of instruction. And then the Lau remedies are basically just guidelines that help identify how to help these students. An implication for this case is that some special assistance to participate in school programs and the sink or swim was no longer acceptable. A limitation for this case is that it attracted very minimal attention.
The Costanza versus Pinkard case, this is an ELLs. In 1981, the key points are that school districts must take appropriate action to overcome language barriers to give the students equal participation. Educational neglect, if only teaching in English, even to non-English speakers, was a violation of civil rights of language minority children. There were serious doubts about the continuing vitality of Lau. The implications are that there are adequate resources that are given to the EL or LEP students. You must be effective in overcoming language handicaps, and there are better trainings for teachers to accommodate to these things. The limitations are that the federal courts take little action if the LEPs are not treated correctly, and you must be tested first to get any of these accommodations.
Proposition 227, this is for ELLs, and the date was 1998. Some key points is that it eliminated most bilingual education programs and requires all public school lessons and activities to be taught the same way in California. San Francisco and San Jose were the only two school districts that were not required to change. The judge of this case denied the switch to make all school districts the same as far as curriculum and learning strategies. An implication is that these two school districts were still getting differentiated instruction to help understand curriculum. And the limitations were the judge blocked the decision to collectively incorporate bilingual programs across the state, and these students' needs are being neglected and often fall behind.
The Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990, and it pertains to special education. Some key points were it protects people with disability from discrimination in the workplace as an extension of the Vocational Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Employers are required to make accommodations for employees with disabilities because of this act. It prohibits discrimination against people with disability in all aspects of public life. Some implications of this bill are that it clearly outlines the civil rights of people with disabilities, and it ensures accommodations within public systems like transportation and other stuff like that. Some limitations of the bill is that it doesn't actually directly pertain to education, so specific protections aren't actually outlined within the bill. Doe v. Withers was a court ruling that was passed in 1992. Some key points of this case were that it requires accommodation for students with disabilities within the classroom. It was passed after a teacher failed to provide a student with oral accommodations during testing. The student ended up failing the class because of this. So now it reinforces the obligation of teachers to provide necessary assistance to students in the classroom. Some implications of this bill, it puts the responsibility on the teacher to follow IEPs in place. And some limitations of the bill, it does not actually specifically outline the extent of the responsibility that falls upon the teacher, and it also doesn't clarify the consequence of failing to do so.
The No Child Left Behind Act was for ELLs and special education. It was passed in 2001. Some of the key points are it has heavy emphasis on accountability through high-stake testing. Each state was required to create academic content standards and assessments, and all students, including ELLs, are expected to pass state tests. Some of the implications are two of the exceptions were eventually added that newcomer ELLs could be excluded from reading tests. And then in 2006, newcomer ELLs math scores could be excluded from the AYP calculations. Some of the limitations are ELLs were required to take state tests regardless of their English proficiency or how long they had been in the country. Every Student Succeeds Act is an ELL and special education. It was passed in 2015. The key points are it improves the academic achievement of the economically disadvantaged, affords states much greater flexibility in establishing school accountability programs, and it provides instruction for English learners and immigrant students. Some of the implications are it has more flexible and reasonable for ELLs. The test scores are not included in school accountability formulas. Some of the limitations are there's concerns about continued reliance on high-stake testing for school accountability. Here are our references.
Thank you.
Thank you.
for listening.